Hello, I'm Michael Marsh, and welcome to the program dedicated to reestablishing constitutional government, first in Oregon and then in the United States. And with me today is State Representative Michael Nearman, and he represents House District 23. And every once in a while you'll see my co-host, Camel, pop up. And Michael, since we are talking about the Constitution and the legislature all in the same breath, tell us, well, let's start with the so-called national popular vote.
Good. Yeah, so this has been on our docket for decades. So every year we have a bill to do national popular vote. And what that is it means that states take a pledge with each other that they're going to send to the Electoral College a reflection of the national vote, not what happens in the state that they're from. So if Oregon voted for, not to pick the candidates or anything like that, but if Oregon voted for Elizabeth Warren for president, but the rest of the nation voted for Donald Trump, or Donald Trump got a majority of the national popular vote, then Oregon would agree to send its electors for Donald Trump and not for Elizabeth Warren. So so that's what it is. So there's some question as to whether or not that's constitutional. The Constitution does provide for interstate compacts, and we have some things for like dividing up fishing and things like that on the Columbia River. But the Constitution says that interstate compacts need to be ratified by Congress before they take effect. The other problem that I have with it is just the idea of doing the national popular vote is a sidestep around the Electoral College. And I think that if we want to do away with the Electoral College, we could do that. We could amend our U.S. Constitution to do that, but that would be the way that we should do that. So I don't favor having a little tricks and fun and games that we're doing with the national popular vote movement to do that. So I oppose the national popular vote. I think that each year it's passed in the House, or almost every session it passes in the House, and then it goes over to the Senate, and President Courtney usually won't let it come up for a vote, so that's where it's died. The national popular vote movement's put a lot of pressure on Senator Courtney over the years, and this year he finally said, well, actually said that last session too, if you put it to the vote of the people of the state of Oregon, he'll let it come to the Senate floor, and in which case it'll probably pass, and it will go to a vote of the people. Ironically, there's a lot of people who are supporters of national popular vote who don't want national popular vote to go to the vote of the people, because they're afraid it'll lose. So I think that's kind of ironic that national popular vote is afraid of the popular vote in Oregon. So anyway, that's where we're at. So I think that I'll give you a prediction on this one, and remember that when you get predictions from me, you always get your money's worth. So anyway, I'm going to predict that it's going to pass both houses, and so we will be part of the National Popular Vote Compact. A little footnote, it doesn't kick in until they get a critical mass of the 270 votes they need. And I think they have, what, 170 or 150 or something like that. So they still need quite a few more electoral votes in their little bank account to do that. So this would be 7 more. And once they get, it doesn't take effect until they get the 270.
Yeah, this last election is a good example of why we have the Electoral College. Because the small states were afraid that they weren't going to be represented in the presidential election.
Yeah.
And at the time, they were worried about Virginia and New York. Now it's California, Illinois, and New York.
Mm-hmm. I think also it's a reflection of the fact that the federal government was created by the states, and so and so that the states get to pick the presiding officer over the federal government. That's kind of also the idea of the national popular or the Electoral College. One other concern I have with it is the Electoral College right now, it eliminates fraud because the states vote, and so if I like the state of Illinois voted overwhelmingly for Hillary Clinton, and no matter what, if they snuck in some more votes if the Secretary of State of the state of Illinois was an unethical person. I don't know who that is. I don't mean to impugn them or anything.
It's pretty good bet.
But if they were an unethical person and they wanted to sneak in more votes or anything like that, that wouldn't affect the impact that Illinois has, because they only have so many electoral votes. And so if there was a Secretary of State of a state that was willing to do things to try to game the election, count votes for illegal aliens or count votes for nobody or double count votes or whatever, then that would have an effect on the national popular vote. And so I think that it invites fraud is what it does. So the Electoral College is a little bit of a bulwark against any one state gaming the system by committing fraud.
Yeah, which is a very good idea. And plus it, makes, if a candidate like Hillary Clinton decides to ignore small states like Wisconsin and Michigan, she paid a price.
Yeah.
Another thing that's perennial, when the legislature comes in, there's always an attempt by the Democrats to take away our Second Amendment rights.
Yeah.
What are they doing this time?
So there's a couple of bills. So one of them, the biggest one that you'll hear about, is the boyfriend loophole thing. They're just redefining some definitions of like what's a family member as far as for taking guns away in a situation where there's domestic abuse. So I'm sensitive to domestic abuse and those kinds of things, but I'm also a believer in due process. And there's been several cases where there's a very public case in Bend where the girlfriend ratted him out for all sorts of awful things that he didn't do, and he had his life wrecked by that person, and the district attorney wouldn't do anything to prosecute that. So I just it makes me there's a reason we have due process, and we need to do that. And I don't think this version of the bill has any due process to it. There's also another bill or resolution, and this one doesn't really have any teeth, but it's just kind of a shake your fist at Congress kind of thing, saying Congress needs to ban certain kinds of automatic weapons or bump stops and those kinds of things that can turn a firearm into an automatic weapon, whatever. That one's not quite as serious because it doesn't really have any moving parts or anything, but I'll vote against that one too. I think it's interesting when you see the gun bills that they come up with. They're pretty far out on the fringe as far as the core of the Second Amendment is truly really safe. It just shows how strong the Second Amendment is, that they can only kind of pick at it at the edges kind of thing. And I don't support it being picked at the edges. At the fringes, if I could evoke some terminology from that the Second Amendment itself, but I think that I think they're wrong-headed in their attempts to do that.
I do too. So, is there an emergency clause on the boyfriend bill?
I'm not sure. I'm almost, just knowing how they operate, I'm almost sure there is, but I don't remember if there is or not. So.
Yeah, I forgot to look. I was wondering if it doesn't and it passes, can the whole bill be
Yes, the
sent
citizens.
to a referendum?
Yeah, the citizens of the state of Oregon have the right to veto any act of the legislature, and we would have 90 days, similar to what we just got done voting on with Measure 101, and we could put that on the ballot with about 58,000 signatures. So it's kind of a tough order to do, but it could be done. So. But I think it has an emergency clause, Mike.
Well, I know the original bill did, but I was wondering, could you, since it's a add-on to another bill, if it didn't have one, could you do a referendum not only on this but the original bill?
Oh, yeah, I see what you're saying. Yeah, we don't have to do a referendum on this one. I'm not really getting right at your question there, but we can always do just an initiative. Yeah. The citizens retain the right to do that, and we could do whatever we want with an initiative. So within the bounds of the Constitution, so we could repeal this bill with an initiative but you have a
That'd
longer
be
time to
harder.
gather. Well, you have longer time to gather signatures, but then you need 88,000 as opposed to 58,000. So it's a little bit bigger threshold, but you have more time to do it. So.
Yeah, that's good. Now, you were mentioning last before we came on that you were part of a task force to amend the Oregon Constitution.
Sure, yeah. So I'm on the Housing and Human Services Committee, and part of this is a little bit in the tall weeds, but right now the Oregon Constitution prohibits the state from owning, having an ownership with a private sector company. So the state can't do that, and they're looking at as part of the housing crisis. Having public-private partnerships that can do that. So right now the Constitution forbids it, except if it's a port. So the Constitution has a little carve-out for a port. You can do right now you can constitutionally do a public-private partnership with a port, but you can't do it for public housing. So they just want to add public housing to that list there. I'm suspicious of state spending on housing. I don't think the state does a very good job, and I don't think the state has really much business in it, except at maybe the very low ends of low-end housing, extremely low-end kind of housing. But I think that the city of Portland really wants to do some projects, and I think being on the task force, I looked carefully at things to see if they were appropriate to go in the Oregon Constitution, and I think they are. So the actual wisdom of it will be left to the voters there. I'll say that there's several safeguards that were put in. One of them is that it doesn't have a definition of affordable housing, and it requires that the definition of affordable housing be put before the voters when the voters are required to vote on it. So that's a safeguard, because you have to tell them what you think affordable housing is when you ask for money to do that. Yeah. It also calls for, it says you have to have annual audits and annual reporting on what you're doing with the money. So there's some safeguards in there to do it. So so I'm supporting this, and I think I just got asked to carry the bill today, so I think I'll be carrying that bill, okay, or that resolution. Yeah.
Now, HUD, the feds, they do private public housing projects together. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to have the state doing a thing other besides that?
States, this would be for municipalities, so it'd be a city. And I think, honestly, I think the city of Portland is the one that's pushing for it. They're the one most likely to take advantage of it. The city of Portland's big enough, they can afford to bond something that's big enough to actually have an impact. I think that a smaller city could take advantage of it. Let's say a city the size of McMinnville or something could take advantage of it. It would be an opportunity for a city that size to say, look, we're not Portland, we're not the big cheese on the block. We can't bond enough money to really make a big difference. But we could bond part of the money, and that could be enough to get some private money to come in, and through that partnership, maybe find a solution to something. And again, I'll be on record as saying I'm not always happy with a lot of the solutions that they find, but to have that opportunity, I think, is appropriate, and to do that in the Constitution is appropriate.
So do you think it'll pass?
I don't know. So, I was talking with the Speaker's office today, and, we had a thing in Oregon. I don't know if you remember. I should look it up, but it was about 15 years ago, and it had a thing in the Constitution that said that described mobile homes as being vehicles, and so then the DMV would require you to, if you had a mobile home, just like in a mobile home park or something, yeah, you had to go get a registration for it, like a vehicle registration, like you register your car, and you had to have a license plate on it. Like, it's never going to go on the road, or if it does, it's whatever, once in its lifetime, or maybe twice if you're lucky. So, and in that case, the company moving it or whatever, they've got licenses and all that. But anyway, we needed to. They wanted to take that out of the Constitution, because it's not. We don't really need to put license plates on mobile homes. So so they ran that, and I think that was kind of obscure, tinkering kind of weird legislation that that you don't read about in the civics books or anything like that, but it was something that needed to be done. And so I think this is kind of somewhat similar. It's kind of in the tall weeds. It's something that's kind of appropriate. It's kind of a little bit hard to understand. It takes a little bit of explaining and all that. And I think that this is similar legislation to that. So I think and the voters passed the mobile home thing, so I think they'll pass this too. I think when it comes to obscure things like this, they trust legislators to get it right. So that's.
What about the gun bill? Do you think that'll pass or not?
Yeah. So again, when you get predictions from me, you always get your money's worth. And so I think that the gun bill will pass. I think the boyfriend loophole bill will pass. It'll do it without my vote. So, but that one will pass. I haven't heard much about the shake your fist at Congress one about the automatic weapons. So I don't know if that'll pass or not. But I think the other one will.
No, I understand, and I haven't had a chance to check it out, but they're going to do a cap and trade bill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What's all that about?
Yeah. So that's they don't call it. It's not really cap and trade. It's cap and tax. Although they won't call it cap and tax. So they call it cap and invest there. So cap and trade is that they establish some threshold for how much you can pollute. If you pollute more than that, then you have to go find someone who's not polluting and buy their credits off of them. So that's cap and trade, and that's not what they're doing. They're doing cap and tax, which is they set a threshold for how much you can pollute, and if you pollute more than that, then the state fines you or taxes you money. So, or the state forces you to invest, right? And so this is going to be a big price tag on this, and so it's going to be pretty onerous. And I think it's just another bill that's just going to add to the cost of doing business, the cost of energy, cost of using energy in Oregon, and that's going to affect everyone. People who drive, people who use products that consume energy, which is everybody. And so, so I think this is not going to pass. So there's another prediction, which once again, you got your money's worth. So I think it won't pass.
Yeah, I was going over to the Capitol the other day, and I saw a bunch of people, and they had big old signs, and I knew even from a distance, without reading the signs, that it was a group from the left because the signs look professional. Our sign doesn't.
That's a great point. I've seen signs at rallies at the Capitol that don't look all that professional, and those tend to be the more constitutionally minded people who make their own signs there.
Yeah.
We don't have the George Soros money to fund our sign making business. So.
Yeah. They were saying they want all this green energy. So, were they talking about this bill, or they got other bills, pushing, their signs saying, solar, wind, waves, all that.
And clean jobs, they say clean jobs on that. Jobs are a byproduct of the pursuit of wealth, and so corporations don't come into existence and don't have activity to produce jobs. They have activity to produce wealth, and in the pursuit of that, they need to hire people, and so they produce jobs. Government doesn't really produce jobs either. Government could possibly, in its pursuit of enabling and opportunities for its citizens, it might have to hire some people, so there might be some jobs created. But to talk about a program like that, that's like the Clean Jobs Act or anything like that, is really to misunderstand the relationships between jobs and the economy.
Yeah. Yeah. So you don't think that will...
I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to say that the cap and invest will not pass. So I've got my little servings of crow set up and a fork next to them, and I'm ready to eat crow on all these predictions here, but these are the predictions that you get. So it'll be fun to play the tape back on this after the session.
Okay, we can do that.
Yeah.
What other bills are interesting?
So there's
know
one
about.
that just passed off the floor yesterday, and that was the one to amend the Oregon Constitution to make health care a right. And so that one's very problematic. I think the best testimony I heard on that one was, the state of Washington had some problems of they put similar language about education in their constitution that an adequate education was a human right. They put that in there. And you say, oh, well, that's just aspirational and that's just nice words and everything. Well, then people start suing. And then the courts come around, and in the state of Washington, the courts came around and said to the legislature, a certain level of education is a right in Washington, and you need to fund this. And the legislature said, well, we don't have the money. And the courts said, well, you need to fund it anyway. And so it's a problem. And so even to the extent that the courts were fining the Washington State Legislature $100,000 a day for contempt of court. So I think we're really putting ourselves in a pickle here. So I think that if you put a line in our Constitution that says that health care is a right, and they're not just talking about a right, they're talking about an entitlement. I don't think these people understand what a right is. I got a right to bear arms, and the DHS isn't supplying me with a box of ammo every month or anything like that. And I have a right to free speech, but the government of the state of Oregon isn't paying for my internet connection or anything. So I don't think these people understand what a right is. They're talking about an entitlement. But this is going to be insufferably expensive if it passes. So the only way to amend the Oregon Constitution is through the people, and so the people will vote on this. If it passes, it has to pass through the Senate. It's already passed through the House. So anyway, we'll see what happens on that. So hopefully the people of the state of Oregon have enough common sense. I worry too, because I see things like on this Measure 101 where the right vote was no, but the money was all on the yes side, and it was a insurmountable tidal wave of money. And so I wonder if they're not going to do an insurmountable tidal wave of money to get health care passed as a right. So,
Yeah, I noticed all the ads for 101, and I noticed they said some medical procedures wouldn't be covered if they did this, but they didn't say what those procedures were. And being a very cynical person who believes that the government should define things, I noticed that even though it passed, there wasn't a lot of people voting.
Right. Yeah. The turnout was embarrassingly small. Yeah. I think that was part of the plans that the proponents had, was they wanted to have it at election time where it wasn't where it was not likely to get a lot of turnout there. Yeah. So they turn out their people and they run away with the election and have a nice day. Yeah. So.
Yeah. They did pretty good to even get it on the ballot, though.
Yeah, yeah. That was Representative Parrish that got it on the ballot there. So she did, and Representative Hayden. So they did great work getting that on the ballot and getting that going. So.
And Kevin was wondering if you have any bills about dogs in the legislature.
Actually, there is one.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So there's one, and I'm not supporting it either. It says that pet stores can no longer get their dogs from puppy mills. They have to get them from the Humane Society. So I don't know about that bill. That sounds like kind of micromanaging of whatever certain segment of the economy, and I don't know if I like that. What do you think about that, Camo?
How are they going to define what a puppy mill is?
Well, no, I think they have some sort of definition of that there, but from a dog breeder, let's say, rather than a puppy mill. But so that's what they're talking about there. So anyway, so I think that would be a kind of weird bill.
Yeah, it seems like a little bit out of what they should be doing. The government should be involved in.
Mm-hmm.
You have any other questions? I told you that Cam will be
yeah, your co-host.
Okay, we've got 3 more minutes. Any other bills that we should know about?
Well, let's see. There was there's a few bills out that are PERS reform bills, and I think that's really important that the legislature start taking some steps to reform PERS. And I have a bill that I'd like to see passed, which would just put every public employee on a 401k style retirement plan from now on out, and for all future work performed. So that one's not going to pass. And then there's some other ones to put, like judges, to take judges off of PERS, things like that, which that needs to be done.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't see the Democrats very enthusiastic about doing that. So I think that if you want PERS reform, you're not going to get it with the party that's in power. And ultimately, that's the taxpayers. That the end dollar, the last dollar that goes in there, when we run out of money to fund that, it comes out of the taxpayers' pockets. And so that's what's going to happen if we don't fix it. And the only way we're going to fix it is to get a different party in power. So
Yeah, and you know the PERS thing. I mean, it's set up. First, you have the government unions, and personally, I don't think they should be allowed to participate in the political process. But they're electing the Democrats, and then they
negotiate with
the
themselves.
Democrats.
They negotiate with themselves.
Yeah, and the judges, like you said, they're on PERS right now, and so if the legislature does make some changes, they just take it to a court, and it goes in front of the judges on it. You know, how do you win?
How about
does
that?
the citizen win?
Yeah. Well, you don't win, you lose, and then the taxpayers end up footing the bill. So, not just the taxpayers, but it has impacts on public education. And so, the reason your kid can't, you know, when they talk about funding of schools and everything like that, it's about a quarter of the money that we send to schools goes to PERS. You know, and so. These are, and that impacts education, and so we just it's just something that we need to fix there. So it's why your county can't repave the roads and all that. It's all traces back to PERS. So.
Yeah. Well, speaking of roads, we've got about 25 seconds. What do you think of Trump's infrastructure plan? Says he's going to give the money to the state to decide.
I'm skeptical. We just had an infrastructure plan in 2008, about $1 trillion, and I don't think we got much infrastructure out of it.
Yeah.
So I'm skeptical.
Yeah, we have more engineers than we do workers at ODOT.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks for coming on and sharing what's going on with the legislature.
Good. Thanks for having me, Mike.